For as long as video games have been around as a commercial endeavour, one genre that has served as the yardstick for technological progression is the genre of flight simulation. In the 1970s, Sega got a head start with the electromechanical game Jet Rocket, in which you shot ground targets from the clouds. They also developed Heli Shooter, another electromechanical game in which you controlled the helicopter from a cabinet seat, also shooting ground-based targets. Taito also got in on the game with its own Skyfighter EM games, before shifting towards video games such as Interceptor. Sega would also follow suit in moving away from EM games and developing video games such as Space Harrier and Afterburner. Fast forward into the 1990s and polygonal 3D graphics became all the rage. The new consoles of the day were using them to power games that showcased the technology of the day, even if a lot of games look somewhat crude by today's standards. Namco, still waiting in the wings to develop a flight simulator of their own, got in on the flurry with a focus on combat using modern aircraft, and in doing so, crafted a series that would eventually cultivate a very strong following in the 30 years since. Today, we take a look at the first in the combat flight simulation series, Ace Combat. Ace Combat, originally localized as Air Combat, is a 1995 arcade combat flight simulator, exclusively released on the Sony PlayStation and developed and published by Namco. It originated from a 1993 arcade game called Air Combat. It's a pretty simple game that ran on Namco's System 21 board. You got a sequel, also for the arcade, called Air Combat 22, running on the System 22 board. Namco then looked towards their PlayStation repertoire and determined that given there is an arcade racing game already on the console in the form of Ridge Racer, it made sense to bring its Air Combat arcade games onto the console in some form. And thus, Ace Combat was born. It proved to be a success with a little under 250,000 copies shifting in its first week on Japanese shelves, and around 600,000 in its lifespan. Accounting for worldwide sales, by 2008, Ace Combat had sold somewhere in the region of 2.25 million units. Ace Combat's success was due in no small part to its impressively addictive gameplay, with good mission variety and great soundtrack for the time, although its visuals were not well received compared to Air Combat 22's more impressive graphics. In spite of its visual struggles, the PlayStation isn't a System 22 after all, Ace Combat was highly successful, so much so that Namco saw it fit to make a series of games for the system over the years. We'll get to those in time, but first things first, we have this game to cover, so where else to start but the packaging? This is a PlayStation The Best copy, indicating that it sold an awful lot of copies during its initial release. As a result, a part of the game cover is obscured by the PlayStation logo in the corner, and the white border surrounding the art makes it somehow less impressive. Despite that, it's a pretty cool cover. Two liveried aircraft fly towards us and away from an exploding enemy craft, with rather straightforward scenery around the place, consisting of a bridge, a body of water, and some land in the background. It's a simple cover with the logo in the top left to fill the empty space between the action, but it works well enough and gets the point of the game across without much trouble. It's the sort of art I'd expect on the size of an arcade cabinet. On the back we have a few images of some craft and some text telling you you're going to be fighting some terrorists up in the skies. Pretty straightforward stuff, and the screenshots are clear enough to show that. That said, the layout of this back cover is clearly expecting there to be an obi on the hinge side, given there's a lot of dead space between the content and the edge. Not a huge deal or anything, just an observation. Inside this copy we have the disc in its usual spot and the manual, which is also the cover. So let's have a look at the manual. Even if we're obviously not going to be able to read any of it, that doesn't mean we can't glean anything from it all the same. The layout is nice and clearly thought out despite the highly compressed amount of stuff in the manual itself. There's only 24 pages, but it fills up every single page with something, even if there's an advert for Tekken on one of them. If you want information on a particular craft, it's right there. If you want information on the controls, it's right there. If you want information on UI elements in-game, they're right there. It's as simple as that. Anyway, before I repeat myself, let's get this spinning. Ace Combat is go! Starting up Ace Combat throws us into a full-motion cinematic with the Namco logo. It's rather quaint really, but then all of a sudden, BAM! Rocking music! Planes flying in formation, heading into combat to clip a bandit's wings. That's military slang, I totally didn't have to look that up in writing this. It's a relatively simple opening cinematic, but it doesn't have to be absolutely amazing, considering it gets the point across pretty well. You're piloting aircraft to swat a couple of bothersome flies. We get onto the main menu, which is pretty simple. It offers us a single player mode, a two-player mode, and an options menu. Let's start a new single player game on normal difficulty.
Gentlemen, you are the cream of the world's air forces. This country desperately needs your help.
We get an introductory speech from a disembodied voice giving us a lowdown on the military situation on this island nation that we, as mercenary ace pilots, have been called upon to defend from terrorist attacks. You'll be surprised to know that in this Japanese release there's English voice acting. I'll touch upon this in greater detail when we cover the game's audio, but suffice it to say, this goes a long way to make this accessible as an import title. And we've barely even started the game. Once this is done, we are sent to a map screen with different locations marked by red icons. Hovering over them gives us a quick description of the mission, and the payout for completing the mission. Going to a mission screen gives us a briefing for it, consisting of an overview of the situation, the local environment the fight will take place in, what objectives we have, and the enemies we can expect to encounter in this mission. You can look at the map in greater detail to check the different enemy craft you'll encounter, but once you accept the mission, you'll be taken straight to your hangar where you will choose your craft. Choose one, take off, and head straight to your mission. Before going on to talk about the gameplay loop, I will give a rundown of the controls. I should add that I am playing with the novice control scheme because the expert control scheme on a D-pad makes eating soup of a fork look sane. Your movement controls are logical if you're familiar with flight simulation, where down on the D-pad pulls you up and up pulls you down, allowing you to gain or lose altitude. Left and right on the D-pad change depending on the control scheme. With the novice setting, it simply banks and turns you in that direction. Using the expert control scheme, left and right will just roll you, leaving it up to you to figure it out from there. Expert also gives the L2 and R2 shoulder buttons utility as they yaw the craft left and right. The other shoulder buttons, L1 and R1, will decrease and increase throttle. This is useful for when you need to cover a great distance quickly or bring yourself under control in a tricky situation. Now the face buttons. The X and circle buttons fire your guns and missiles respectively. Square embiggens your minimap when you need to get your bearings, and triangle changes your lock-on target. Namco had a knack for getting its arcade ports playing pretty well. Not that this is an arcade port exactly, despite the restrictive nature of the original PlayStation controller, although you could play using the Negicon if you wanted. It's a reasonably intuitive way of controlling the game and your craft given the tools at your disposal. It's not the absolute best you can get, but for the nature of the game, it's fine. You lose finesse due to the digital controls, but at the very least, it works well enough for a simple arcade-style game like this. On that note, let's talk the user interface. Taking up a good chunk of the UI is the altitude indicator, showing which way you're going vertically as well as your roll. At the top is your compass, your speed to the left, and your altitude to the right. At the bottom is the ammunition you have left for your missiles and guns, and at the top left is your remaining fuel, which depletes faster if you're going full throttle, and running out will cause you to crash and fail the mission. More on that shortly. The user interface works well enough. Everything you need to pilot your craft is on screen, although the layout might seem a little odd in places. Having one consumable at the top and the others at the bottom is certainly a decision, though not one I'm particularly fond of. It makes it seem a little cluttered. Now we've got to talk about what you actually do. Your objective in Ace Combat is more often than not to eliminate all hostile forces by using your aircraft's weapons. As you get in range of an enemy target, you'll be able to open fire on them. Missiles are a pretty easy way to take targets down by virtue of the fact that they're capable of locking on, although some craft can outmaneuver them, and you only get so many of them. You can also fire 2 at a time for a double dose of destruction. but if they both miss, you'll be in for a fun time. Ace Combat has its ways of making you mindful of your opportunities at taking down enemy aircraft. Guns require a bit more finesse. Whilst missiles can be used from a kilometre away from the target, you have to be within 500 metres to make your guns a viable option, and aiming them requires a bit of work. You'll see a targeting reticle appear, marking where to aim in order to get the best chance of hitting the target, and enough shots will clip its wings and bring it crashing down to earth. It's a satisfying feeling successfully getting a string of shots on target. However, they can do much the same to you. If the enemy gets you in their sights and you don't maneuver out of the way quickly enough, you can find yourself heading down in a blaze of inglory. Complete all your objectives without being destroyed, and you will be given a payment in points to the tune of the mission bounty, as well as the different enemy craft and structures destroyed. Repair costs for your own damage will be deducted, however. So now that I've explained the basics of how a mission will work in most scenarios, I'll go into a few other things within this game and the different systems it incorporates. At base, you have the opportunity to check out your hangar. You start out with 2 aircrafts, the F4 and the F14, but as you progress, you'll be able to purchase more aircraft with the points you score during the missions. Each aircraft is given a score on a diagram in terms of 5 attributes: offense, defense, mobility, stability, and power. They determine how much you can give and take, how well you can move, how controllably you move, and how fast you can move. Each aircraft is a balancing act in terms of what aspects each one excels in and where it may falter. An F-15, for example, can have strong scores in offense, defense, and power, but it's not the smoothest thing to pilot, though certainly not the worst. You may notice that there is a counter at the bottom of the screen in the hangar. This denotes the number of aircraft you have at your disposal. This is where I go into one of the more interesting things about this game's progression, and that is what happens when you lose an aircraft. Think of this game as having an arcade-style life system, only you can use your points to buy lives back in the form of brand new aircraft. You can cause a game over if you run out of aircraft, so it's a good idea to have a decent collection on hand just in case you need a contingency plan for when things go awry. I quite like this as a mechanic. You can tell the mentality was to introduce some sort of arcade jeopardy, but it works in a way that makes sense. You can't fight a war if you've run out of weapons. Also, points are pretty easy to acquire, so get to it. Also, whilst it allows you to buy more aircraft to keep your chances of survival high, it does make it so that you can only have 8 aircraft in your hangar at any one time, so that you don't hoard all of the aircraft. One thing I don't entirely like about this game outside of the missions though, is navigating the map. It took me a moment to realise that you have to fly one node at a time before you can reach the destination you're after. It can also make pressing the D-pad feel directionless, ironic as it sounds. It's not an easy screen to navigate and I don't like it. I don't know how future games fare in this respect, since at the time of this review, this is the first game in the franchise that I have played, but I hope it's better. As for additional stuff, starting from the 4th mission where you destroy the enemy's operational capability in an evacuated city, you will have a wingman fly alongside you in your missions. You get to choose from an increasing list of pilots and craft, albeit with an upfront payment to cover their hiring costs, and you can direct them to focus on a particular task, like focusing on eliminating enemy craft or wiping out ground forces. The wingman does a pretty decent job at what you tell them to do. They're not amazing, but if you tell them to eliminate hostile aircraft, they'll do it, whilst also giving you the opportunity to take a number of them down yourself. They can even keep hostiles busy whilst you're dealing with other targets. I'll go into the specifics of the different missions in this game soon, but first I'll cover the presentation of this game. The audio will come momentarily, but let's start with the visuals. To describe Ace Combat's visuals as being of its time would be about right. In 1995, the PlayStation's visual capability wasn't well understood. You only had to look at Kingsfield and its mind-boggling effects to work that out. Impressive for the time, but laughably dated compared to what was to come. To that end, if we compare this game with Air Combat 22, then naturally, it looks disappointing. It runs at a lower resolution and a lower frame rate, the polygons are decidedly chunkier, the textures are a showcase of the PlayStation and its foibles, and where Air Combat 22 is like cocaine, Ace Combat is like Valium. But for what it is though, it's far from the ugliest game on the PlayStation. I mean, Bubsy 3D is a game that exists, and Ace Combat has the benefit of being released within the first year of the PlayStation's lifespan. Whilst the graphics aren't the most detailed, they do a decent job of making things look like what they're meant to represent. The aircraft in this game looked like their real-world equivalents, and the environments look mostly convincing. The texture work also carries a reasonable amount of detail, helping to add to the style the game is going for. The colour scheme of terracotta and purple on white is certainly a choice though. And so is whatever in the name of Urusei Yatsudai is going on with the SF-39. The user interface in-game is generally clear and the layout is functional, but there is one problem. Trying to spot an enemy target at distance against a white backdrop is like digging out detail in anything with Rick Rubin's production credit. Another big problem with this game is the resolution switching. This game frequently switches between 240p and 480i during gameplay, and whilst it's clear about when and where it happens, what's less clear is why 240p is sometimes offset. This problem is best exhibited with going between an in-game dogfight and looking at a loading screen. Both pictures are 240p, but one is offset a few pixels, making it look bodged together, like I haven't set my OSSC up properly. That being said, this issue being in the loading screens especially, makes it less of a big deal in the end. I don't mind that it's like this as much because of that, but that it's a thing at all is unfortunate regardless. Thankfully, the combat runs at a smooth 30 frames per second. That might sound odd calling 30 frames per second smooth, but I don't recall encountering any hitches or stutters during my play sessions here. I think that's about all I have for the visual stuff in this game. Not amazing, but far from awful, especially compared to the other games on the system. So let's have a look at the other aspect of the presentation, the audio. At the outset, I mentioned this game had voice acting. The cutscene at the start of a new campaign and every mission briefing is voiced by Daniel Dresner. Despite not having the biggest or best body of work, he at least voiced a somewhat convincing commanding officer, given the idea is to get the point across quickly and concisely. The other voice work was handled by Jeffrey Morehouse and Kimberly Aylward. I cannot find a single thing about these two. At least Dresner had other acting credit in games like Chameleon, but nothing for the other two. I can only assume they found Jeffrey and Kimberly hanging around the streets of Yaguchi and asking them if they wanted to do some voice lines. I mean, that's basically how Resident Evil happened. The other voice work definitely works in context, even though it's far from the most amazing performance and direction overall. Really, the thing that hurts the performance above everything else is the lack of unique lines. Keep missing with your missiles, you'll hear the same voice line. Keep flying in a direction away from the action, you'll hear the same voice line. Get hit by stuff?
Alert, body damage. Alert, body damage. Alert, body damage. Alert, body damage.
So the rest of the sound design. It's alright. The hum of an aircraft is constant in missions and is affected by how fast you're going. Gunfire, although not the best sounding, gives pretty good feedback when you hit your target, and the feedback from missiles is especially gratifying. All in all, the same could be taken from my Ridge Racer review way back. The sound design works for what it is, even if it's not the absolute best sound effects for that purpose. It's fine. What isn't fine, however, is the music. The music isn't fine at all. It's damn good. If what I've seen online is anything to go by though, I'm supposed to expect better music in later entries. I have to wonder how much better things get from here, given that I quite like how this game starts it all. The game's music features composers Masako Origami and Nobuhide Isayama, as well as featuring guitarist Kazutaka Fujimoto. I can't find much info about Fujimoto as it happens, besides a dormant Instagram page. With Origami and Isayama, however, they've each worked on a handful of games, with Isayama working on Ridge Racer Revolution and Ace Combat 2, and Origami working on Tekken 5 and Taiko no Tatsujin Drum and Fun. There is a decent selection of tracks on this soundtrack. Not a million billion tracks at all, but there are a fair few tracks that sound pretty good in their different ways. Saying that, it has that 1990s Namco cheese to it. Admittedly, I'm into that, but I understand if you're not, especially given later entries do things quite a lot differently. Some tracks work better for different missions, but they tend to have upbeat rocking grooves. For 1995, where you weren't getting anything better for a little while, the soundtrack definitely worked for what it was going for. The only problem is I'm not sure there's a standout track. I like the soundtrack as a whole, and it can go pretty hard at times, but there's only so much meat to its bones here. I think that about sums it up, so let's get on to the game's progression and content. This game's progression is an interesting beast. It's not a big game, and indeed I beat it in the space of 2 streams pretty much. There are 17 missions in all, and you can go through this whole thing in an evening if you wanted to. What does help things, however, is how replayable it all is. The game provides you with a lot of different variables to allow you to change up how you play the game, instead of the game just curtly dropping you into a mission map and telling you to go somewhere. For as low in quantity as the missions are, you do at least get a lot of options on how to approach each one, using different planes, pursuing different tactics, and challenging yourself in ways that help give the experience more value. Ace Combat's save system also allows you to be a bit of a save scummer if you want. If you want to revert to a previous save after even a single mission failure, the game gives you that option. I very nearly took that option but opted against it because the game gave me enough options to not need it. And from this point on, I'm going to be spoiling the endgame content as well as the stuff that comes out after you beat the game. So if you don't want any spoilers for what happens, then hop on over to the conclusion chapter. So Mission 16 is a mission that you should have a little familiarity with, in that you will have to fly through a ravine and you cannot poke your head over the top because you will be atomized. This time it differs from a prior mission, in the sense that you go through a cave at points. But the idea is the same: don't go over the top, don't crash into the cliff faces, and reach the end of the stage. However, you realise that you were supposed to reach the enemy's base of operations at the end. But you don't see any such structures. You don't even see any land, just a vast open sea. So what's going on here? Well, as it turns out, the enemy's base of operations is a giant flying fortress, armed to the teeth with guns and missiles, and will absolutely tear through you if you aren't sufficiently prepared. As a result, you need to go in knowing that maneuverability is critical to your survival. A final boss like this is a pretty cool way to end this game, especially considering you have not gone up against anything like this. And because you get a wingman to take with you, you can keep them busy with the unendingly spawning YF-22. There are a number of things you can target on this beast, but by and large they pretty much don't matter. You can knock off the huge engines, but it doesn't really do much of anything. It doesn't slow it down much, if at all. But destroying them does at least allow you to target the stuff that matters: the fuselage. Bombard the fuselage with your missiles whilst avoiding the missiles that it fires at you, and you'll whittle down the fortress's integrity. Once you destroy it, you'll have completed your mission, the commanding officer congratulates you, and the credits will roll. Mission complete. However, there is a thing in the top corner on the main menu here. What's an O-make? Well, start up a new game and you'll get the introductory cutscene again, but this time, depending on the difficulty you beat the game, you'll get different things for your next playthrough. On the normal difficulty setting I played on, I got access to all the aircraft right in my hangar, as well as all the wingmen. Playing on easy gets you just the aircraft. Beating the game on hard will unlock all of that, plus a direct stage select, meaning you can play any mission you want from the start. And this isn't even going into all the other unlockable stuff in this game, but I've already gone into enough stuff here. I think it's about time that I wrapped this review up, so let's finish things off. So in conclusion, Ace Combat made a fairly strong start to what would be a pretty popular series of games, with later games going on to do a lot of different things. But this stripped back first installment feels like a breath of fresh air in some respects. As someone who has not yet played any other Ace Combat game, I quite liked what I played of this. The control, whilst not amazing, was still good enough for me to not get frustrated in playing it, and the content, although limited, was varied enough to enable a decent amount of replayability. The presentation aspects range from okay to very good, with a good soundtrack and decent sound work, as well as graphics that are functional if not necessarily amazing. The game is relatively threadbare, but for its time this wasn't a problem. As for recommendations, the Western releases of the game are available for less than $10 if you don't mind the greatest hits or platinum labels, but prices can be a little higher for the NTSC long box version. NTSC J copies are even cheaper by and large, with a good number of listings on Yahoo auctions for around 500 yen. In fact, buying all 3 PlayStation entries can cost less than $10 in all, as some of the listings bundle all 3 together. Bear in mind though that you'll need to account for the service charges of your proxy shipper, and by that point you might as well add a whole bunch more stuff to your order if you go that route. So we've gathered that it's a pretty importable game, but what about the language requirements? Well, for the most part, you can get by without worrying about them. Most of the text of this game is voiced in English, and there's only a few things that are in Japanese, like the commands that you give to your wingman. Nothing that'll ruin your experience. So on the whole, I would recommend this game, if you can get it pretty cheap, which shouldn't be too difficult. Ace Combat is a pretty good combat simulator for the time, and for the console at its point in life. We'll delve into its sequel next time out. If you have any suggestions on what I ought to cover, please let me know. I cover pretty much anything. My website, daniellearmouth.com, has my retro import collection and wish list, so check those out. There's also my Twitter for keeping up to date with everything that I'm up to, and I also occasionally post on Instagram, so there's that too. As ever though, this has been Daniel Learmouth. Siddy.